Few places have told us more about life in the Roman Empire than ancient Pompeii. Millions of tourists come here every year to see the remains of this city destroyed by the volcano Vesuvius. Nearly 2 millennia ago, Pompeii was buried under 16 feet of ash. 16,000 men, women and children were killed. But remarkably, nearly 2,000 years later, dramatic evidence of the instant they died still survives. These strange figures are not statues, but the remains of people, frozen in the last seconds of their lives. Nothing else like them exists. But for centuries, why they were stuck in these extraordinary positions has been a mystery. Now, using new technology and state-of-the-art experiments, scientists will bring us face to face with two of the volcano's victims, uncover the secrets of this deadly volcano, and finally reveal what kind of agonizing death locked these people in these strange contortions. '79 AD, the Roman town of Pompeii. A bustling port, gateway to the Mediterranean Sea and the trading empire beyond. Pompeii was home to 20,000 people. They didn't know they were living in the shadow of a volcano that would become Europe's most notorious. Mount Vesuvius in southwest Italy. It sits near a crisis point in the Earth's crust, where two tectonic plates collide. The volcano had been dormant for 300 years. But on August 24th, it roared back to life. First, there was an earthquake. Then Vesuvius erupted. A giant plug of rock and earth was hurled into the air in an explosion that was 1,000 times more powerful than the bomb that hit Hiroshima. A massive cloud of dust and ash formed above the mouth of the volcano, pushed up by an immense column of gas. Within just 6 hours, this cloud stretched 20 miles into the sky, over twice the height of Mount Everest. The cloud spread across the sky like black ink. It was so dense, it blocked out the sun and turned the sky above Pompeii to night. Fires blazed across the mountain slopes. Lightning storms ripped through the sky. This was one of the biggest natural disasters the ancient world had ever known. Over 18 hours, Vesuvius spewed out thousands of tons of rock, pumice and ash into the atmosphere. The city of Pompeii was drowned under a 16-foot blanket of ash and forgotten. 16 centuries later, Pompeii was rediscovered. Archaeologists began to uncover a place unlike anywhere else in the world. The volcanic ash had formed a seal around the town. Locked beneath it was a perfect snapshot of Roman life. Preserved almost intact were temples, bathhouses, and the oldest surviving stone amphitheatre in the world. Even paintings on the walls survive. But something else emerged that was utterly mysterious. Dotted around the town were the bodies of the dead. They too had been sealed in the volcanic ash. Encased within the ash, the flesh disintegrated, but a lasting imprint remained. The agonizing instant of each person's death had been captured forever. In the mid-19th century, Italian archaeologists preserved the hollow molds left behind with plaster cast. Nothing else like them has ever been found before or since. But for centuries, these casts have been shrouded in mystery. Despite decades of research, scientists still don't know what agonizing death left these people locked in these strange positions, as if frozen in time. The casts have given up many of their secrets. Some are so detailed they hold clues to who they were. This is the largest figure found here. His size, much bigger than an average Roman, suggests he might have been a gladiator brought here from Africa. He would have entertained vast crowds in Pompeii's amphitheatre. Many gladiators were slaves, criminals or prisoners of war brought to Italy from Rome's colonies and forced into a career of fighting. In 79 AD, this town, which today attracts millions of tourists, was part of a vast empire approaching the height of its power. Lands under Roman control stretched from the north of England across North Africa and out towards the Middle East. The population here was a reflection of that.
I think we get a real full range of people living in the city, from the very, very rich, right down through the middle classes, down to some of the poor as well. They're coming from all over the place. We see people here from North Africa, from the Near East, from Northern Europe, living here in Pompeii together.
This cosmopolitan town was designed to entertain. Archaeologists have found buildings that were once bars, restaurants, and theatres.
Walking around the streets, you really get a sense of what range of activities there are for people to do. Even the streets themselves were, of course, incredibly active spaces where people spend a lot of their time, as modern Italians do today, outside of their house, on the street, interacting with people. So practically every square inch of this city could have been given over to leisure, or to at least very social activities.
Numerous murals and mosaics have revealed intricate details about everyday life here. This building was thought to be one of Pompeii's livery yards. Here, the body of a man and a young boy were found together. Some believe they're father and son. It's easy to imagine that together they ran these stables outside the city gates. Most children in the ancient empire worked for their families, as only the very wealthy could afford school. Nowhere has told us more about Roman life than Pompeii. Now, scientists want to know once and for all how the young boy and the other victims came to be frozen in time when they died. When a volcano erupts, lava from deep below the Earth's crust explodes up through the surface. This molten rock, heated to up to 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit, will destroy anything in its path. Lava flows are the most well-known and spectacular of a volcano's deadly weapons. But lava did not kill the people of Pompeii. The town is 6 miles from Vesuvius. It would have taken around 6 days for a lava flow to reach it. Plenty of time for the population to escape. And no evidence of a lava flow has ever been found here. So what did kill these people and lock them in these strange positions? With lava ruled out, for decades people thought the ash that had preserved the city was also responsible for killing its people. It was assumed they suffocated to death on this deadly fallout. And this seemed to support their theory. A strange cast found near the body of a mule and known as the muleteer. Muleteers were at the bottom of Pompeii's social hierarchy, but they were vital for transporting goods around the city. This man knew the narrow streets of Pompeii better than anybody else, but his knowledge wouldn't help him escape when Vesuvius erupted. His remains now sit in Pompeii's granary.
Until recently, it was widely thought that the victims died from the very heavy ashfall from the volcano, and that people literally suffocated and were buried by the falling ash very quickly. This victim appears to be protecting himself by putting his hands across his mouth as he's breathing.
But by comparing this cast with modern-day victims, Peter believes it's been misinterpreted.
People die suddenly from suffocation. They fall to the ground in any kind of posture, and they don't remain fixed like this. So we have to find a different explanation for how this person died, even though they look as if they're in the process of suffocating at the time of death.
These people didn't suffocate on ash. They weren't consumed by lava. So what did leave them frozen in time? To find out, scientists had to look beyond Pompeii to the small town of Herculaneum. Herculaneum was even closer to Vesuvius, just over 3 miles from the crater. It's thought that in 79 AD, Herculaneum was a small and exclusive town, home to 5,000 people. It was a playground for the rich and powerful of Rome, whose every need was catered to by an army of slaves. But it too was decimated by Vesuvius. The force of the earthquake and eruption may have been even stronger here. The people watched in horror as the vast cloud of debris shot into the air. And then they ran for their lives. Just like Pompeii, Herculaneum had been miraculously preserved by the ash that fell. When archaeologists began to excavate, they found few human remains compared to the hundreds at Pompeii. They assumed the population had escaped, until in these buildings, which were once boat sheds, they made an intriguing discovery. the skeletons of some 20 victims. The bones here are very different from the bodies found at Pompeii, but they contained vital evidence that took scientists a step closer to understanding how Vesuvius had erupted.
Here you can see the casts of these skeletons, which show us the posture of these people when they died, just frozen in the instant of the death. No one of them has a voluntary reaction.
The bones showed that these people had died an instant death, and they contained further clues.
Here you can see, for instance, a skull of a child which is completely exploded. Also, in this case, an adult. So you see these kind of fractures are just typical of cremated people. And also the blackening outside, on the edges, and also within the skull. So this testifies that actually the volition of the brain produced the explosion of the skulls. We could tell that these people were exposed to a temperature as high as at least 500 degrees centigrade.
But at Herculaneum, just like Pompeii, there was no evidence that a boiling lava flow had struck the town. Scientists realized that Vesuvius had created a different blast of intense heat. One that was so powerful it could kill people 3 miles from the crater. So what was the source of this deadly inferno? When piecing together what happened when Vesuvius erupted, archaeologists and scientists can draw on a remarkable source of information. An eyewitness account of the disaster written by a man named Pliny the Younger. Pliny was just a teenager in 79 AD. This was the beginning of his writing career. He had watched the volcano from a town across the Bay of Naples and recorded every detail of what he saw in a series of letters, written to the great Roman historian Tacitus.
The fact that we have an eyewitness account surviving to us over all these millennia is truly remarkable, because we may think how many people could have seen the eruption, but when we think that somebody saw the eruption who was to become a great writer himself, and who has a great eye for detail and observation, and who subsequently is invited by the greatest of all Roman historians, Tacitus, to give him an account of that event, makes the whole thing really quite extraordinary.
Pliny's account was so meticulous, it has allowed scientists to chart the eruption almost to the hour. Although it was written nearly 2,000 years ago, Pliny's account has always been regarded as a trustworthy source of information.
We can take just about most of what Pliny writes in his 2 letters to Tacitus as reliable. The first thing, I think, is just for a teenage boy, Pliny was about 17 or 18 at the time, seeing something which is so extraordinary has to stick with him for the rest of his life. I think that's one factor. The other factor is that Tacitus has asked him specifically to give him a very accurate account.
But there was one part of Pliny's account that no one could believe. He wrote that 12 hours after the eruption, Vesuvius was still spewing out millions of tons of ash into the atmosphere. It rained down on the people and the cities below. But then Pliny described something unusual. He wrote that a great mass of material broke away from the eruption column, and instead of shooting into the air, it flowed down the sides of the volcano. He claims an avalanche of gas and dust spread out across the land, covering everything in its path. For decades, this part of the young writer's account was ignored, until an extraordinary event that happened 5,000 miles away in the state of Washington. On Sunday the 18th of May, 1980, Mount St. Helens was ripped apart. The entire disaster was caught on film. For 9 hours, a vertical eruption column 20 miles high spread a cloud of 500 million tons of ash and debris over 3 states. When it fell to Earth, it covered everything within 50 miles in a thick layer of ash. But as Mount St. Helens erupted, scientists noticed an unusual phenomenon, captured on film for the first time. The footage shows the whole north face of the volcano collapsing. And as it does, it releases a searing hot avalanche of gas and dust down the mountainside. This is called a pyroclastic current. And it's deadly. Temperatures inside a pyroclastic current can reach 1100 degrees Fahrenheit, and they can travel at 300 miles per hour. Nothing else from a volcano is so blisteringly hot or moves with such devastating power and speed. Scientists realized that this was just like what the young writer Pliny had described 2,000 years earlier in Pompeii. They now know that Vesuvius, just like Mount St. Helens, is a particularly dangerous kind of volcano, created in zones where 2 plates in the Earth's crust collide. One plate gets forced down or subducted under the other to create what's known as a subduction volcano. Like all volcanoes, subduction ones consist of a pool of magma, hot molten rock that's being forced up to the Earth's surface. But what makes these so dangerous is that as the lower plates slide under the upper one, it adds bubbles of gas into the magma. This radically changes the way subduction volcanoes erupt. As the magma rises, the pressure on the bubbles expand and eventually explode out of the rock that confines them.
The style of eruption is controlled by the composition of the magma and how much gas is in the magma. If there's no gas in magma and it rises to the surface, it will erupt non-explosively. It'll erupt just as a lava flow that might pond inside the volcano or flow out along the volcanic flanks. If there is gas in the magma, it can erupt explosively. And this is because as gas is making its way to the surface, because the pressure is lowering as you get closer to the surface, the gas will expand. And by the time it gets towards the surface, the pressure inside the volcano is so high that it breaks the rock open. And the gas rips the magma apart to form pyroclasts.
When Vesuvius erupted, the gas inside the volcano exploded out, shattering the rock that surrounded it and creating a massive avalanche of pulverized rock and gas. This pyroclastic current surged down the mountain towards Herculaneum. 12 hours after the initial eruption, the town was drowning under a thick blanket of ash and pumice. But the people sheltering in the boat sheds must have thought they'd survived the worst. They had no idea what was coming their way. The searing hot wave of gas tore down the mountain. Superheated to around 900 degrees Fahrenheit, it covered 3 miles in just minutes. And then it reached the boat sheds. This pyroclastic flow is what killed the people inside. Their brains boiled, their flesh was instantly scorched off their bones. Even though the massive heat surge stripped the people of all trace of their identity, their skulls still hold detailed information about how they looked. Now, for the first time ever, this will be used by facial reconstruction expert Richard Neve to anatomically rebuild a face of one of the volcano's victims.
If you have a skull, you have the proportions of the face, you have the shape of the face, you have the position of the features. It's all laid out there because it is the armature of the face, as the skeleton is the armature of the body.
Richard is working with the skull of a young woman, which was found almost intact.
So here we have a complete, perfect skull of a 23-year-old or thereabouts. The skull was always thought to be that of a beautiful woman because of the bone structure, because of the symmetry of the skull, and because of the proportions of the skull.
The woman was dubbed by the archaeologists that found her as the Belladonna. An inhabitant of the prosperous town of Herculaneum, this woman may have lived a life of luxury and pleasure. But it was cut short by tragedy. To reconstruct this woman's face, the team first need to create a copy of the skull. Using cutting-edge technology, they scan it in 3D.
What we have here, the 3D scanner, it's got different lenses, where the bottom one actually is a stroboscopic light that generates a grid pattern, so it projects a pattern, horizontal lines, etc., onto an object. Okay. At the top we have a 3D camera that detects it at an angle, and we got an extra lens or an extra digital camera that just takes pictures of it.
The data collected creates an entire 3D image.
You can already see a better representation of what we have.
From this, a copy of the skull will be made, which will form the basis of Richard's reconstruction.
We shall be able to get, I hope, a perfect replica of this skull and work straight onto that.
The intact skull from Herculaneum will allow Richard to reconstruct the Belladonna's face. But just 5 miles away in Pompeii, the human remains are completely different. These were whole bodies, not skeletons. They hadn't been stripped of their flesh. And remarkably, some of the casts showed imprints of the clothes they were wearing when they died. How could the same volcano reduce people to scorched skeletons in one place and preserve them like this just a few miles away? This time, the clues wouldn't come from the bodies of the dead, but from deep within the earth. Nearly 2,000 years on from the eruption, the soil around Pompeii still contains the geological material that Vesuvius spewed out. In this former quarry, a cross-section of the earth reveals layers of the ash that fell from the sky, known as fall deposits. Within them, geologists also identified material that could only come from a pyroclastic current. These are called surge deposits.
This is a fall deposit here. It's really well sorted. All of the pumices are the same size, which is what I mean by well sorted. And you can see that it's laterally continuous all the way across this outcrop. So this means that this was just literally falling from the sky and blanketing the topography. This is a surge deposit. It's finer grained. They're more poorly sorted, which means they have a range of class sizes or a range of rock sizes in them.
This surge deposit was clear evidence of the pyroclastic current that we now know struck Herculaneum and killed everyone in the boat shed. But geologists have now discovered that this wasn't the only pyroclastic current to explode out of Vesuvius. In this wall of Earth, they found the surge deposits from no less than 6 pyroclastic currents.
All 6 of the surges produced during the 79 AD eruption are in exposure here. So this is the first surge deposit, this is the second one. But these surges came in and they didn't reach Pompeii.
The first 3 surges ran out of energy before they reached the walls of Pompeii. Inside the city, the ashfall had begun to ease, and those who'd survived may have thought they were safe. Archaeological evidence found here suggests that some who'd fled the city may have returned to collect their valuables. But Vesuvius was becoming ever more deadly.
This particular outcrop, you notice that the surge deposits are starting to get thicker and thicker. And we know from tracing these out that the thicker ones went much further, right? So in this case, you can see that as the eruption progressed, the surges that came down became more energetic, more dangerous. They started traveling much further. This surge up here that's only 30 centimeters thick in this location, this is the surge that killed the people of Pompeii.
More than 18 hours after Vesuvius first erupted, the eruption column full of gas and debris collapsed again and released a 4th pyroclastic current. This one finally had enough energy to reach Pompeii. The superheated gas and debris raced over the ground at nearly 200 miles per hour. It was channeled down the narrow streets. Exposed to this level of heat, the brain boils in just fractions of a second and shuts down the respiratory system. This is what killed the people of Pompeii. Scientists now know why the remains in Pompeii and Herculaneum look so very different. Pompeii is 5 miles further away from Vesuvius than Herculaneum. This made a crucial difference. By the time the 4th pyroclastic current had covered the extra distance, it was nearly 400 degrees cooler, making it the exact temperature to kill them instantly, but not to burn off their flesh. Their bodies were then sealed in the ash. The combination of this unique set of conditions is what left these people as if locked in time. But there is one last mystery. If these people died of extreme heat, how come their clothes were left intact? In order to find out, this machine at the University of Edinburgh in Scotland can recreate the conditions of a pyroclastic current in the lab.
We were trying to run this test is to simulate the conditions of what happened, to try to understand how it is that the temperature could have been sufficiently high to effectively kill the people instantaneously, and yet the clothing wasn't burned.
The fabric Luke's using is a type of boiled wool. It's very similar to the kind of material worn by the population of Pompeii. It's wrapped around a piece of pork meat to replicate people's flesh beneath their clothes.
What we're trying to do here is simulate a pyroclastic surge moving down the sides of the volcano and over Pompeii at a velocity of about 40 miles an hour and a gas temperature of about 300 degrees Celsius.
The machine will recreate the exact conditions that killed the people of Pompeii when the 4th pyroclastic current hit them. Luke will heat the sample for 150 seconds, believed to be the same amount of time the victims in Pompeii were exposed to the intense heat.
So if we open up the sample here and we take a look, what we can see here is that we have some discoloration of the wool cloth around the perimeter, but it's really the area in the center of the woolen cloth that we're most interested in. And you can see here I can push quite hard on it, pull it in both directions, and there's some slight discoloration of the cloth, but it otherwise appears to be pretty well undamaged. We then take a look at the pork that was underneath the woolen cloth. We can see that from the surface of it we do have some surface discoloration. It does appear to be slightly cooked. And if I take the knife and I cut into the pork, we can have a look inside and see. And you can see that the surface of the pork is discolored slightly, and we do have some surface cooking of the pork.
The pork has been blasted with a 570-degree heat, more than enough to kill a human. But the clothing has survived.
Effectively, what this test shows us about the people at Pompeii is that it's possible that they could have been affected by severe heat, and yet the clothing they were wearing would be relatively undamaged.
And scientists also now know exactly what locked the people of Pompeii in these strange positions. Remarkably, despite years of research, there are still clues in Pompeii that were overlooked for decades. This is what's known as the Macellum. It was once Pompeii's bustling indoor market, a lively and sometimes smelly focal point for the city's inhabitants. It's now the final resting place for 2 victims of Vesuvius. For years, people thought this man had raised his arms to protect himself from some unseen attacker.
It's called a pugilistic attitude because it resembles the appearance of a boxer in a fight, and they're holding up their arms to ward off the opponent, or they're trying to protect their face against something.
Now forensic scientists know what this strange pose means.
We see this appearance when people die in house fires, for example, or when they burn to death. And it's when the body is subjected to extreme heat at the moment of death. And it means that not only has the skin been burnt, but the tissues underneath the skin have also been affected. And so when the muscles start to burn, they contract and shorten and make the arms and the legs bend in this way.
The pose is a completely involuntary reaction. The heat of the pyroclastic current caused this man's body to spasm. The contorted bodies left a lasting imprint in the ash, which eventually surrounded them, to create something never seen before or since. These casts are the treasures of Pompeii, but they're incredibly fragile, and scientists fear they won't last forever. Facial reconstruction expert Richard Neve is working to create the skull of the belladonna from Herculaneum. Now he wants to see if he can also create the face from one of the victims in Pompeii. To do that, he needs access to a skull locked inside the plaster cast. The cast Richard has chosen for this remarkable recreation is inside a building that was once Pompeii's granary. He's chosen this body cast because the plaster encasing the skull is incredibly thin. Although this is one of the oldest casts ever created, very little is known about who this person once was. We think he is a man because of his large build. Where he was from and what he did for a living remains a mystery. But now, for the first time, it might be possible to see what he once looked like.
1, 2, 3.
To do that, the team are hoping that by using a handheld X-ray machine, they will be able to see the skull inside the plaster.
I'm hoping that Stone is going to be able to do some magic so that we can actually see the angle of the jaw, which I think is just there.
By taking a series of X-rays from different angles, they gather images from which they'll piece together a 3D skull. At first, the images the machine produces are grainy and difficult to read. But they gradually reveal that beneath the plaster, the skull has survived almost intact.
Oh, wow. It's surprising, isn't it, when you look at it like this? There's the front of the skull, beautifully shown. There's the frontal sinus here. That's the roof of the orbit down there. There's the nose, the floor of the mouth. From this, we can create a skull. And having done that, we can create the face on the skull we made.
At his studio in England, using measurements from the X-rays and 3D scans, Richard has built copies of the skulls of both the belladonna and the man from Pompeii.
The next step for me is to put eyes into the orbits, to develop the nose and the mouth and the ears, because these establish the basic things about the face.
Richard builds layers of muscle and soft tissue following the exact contours of the skull.
This is not sculpture. This is an anatomical reconstruction, which is a totally different exercise altogether.
After 2 months of preparation, Richard's reconstructions are finished. The belladonna has been brought back to the town where she once lived. This young and beautiful woman from Herculaneum died cowering in one of the boat sheds. Now her face has been reconstructed based on the anatomy of her skull. This young woman once walked along the narrow streets of Herculaneum. She may even have worshipped here in this temple. Richard has also reconstructed the face of the man from Pompeii. We'll never know exactly who he was, but we do know how he died. We think this man managed to live through 18 hours of the eruption. He may have tried to gather his belongings. He probably escaped the worst of the ashfall by hiding inside his home. By dawn the next day, he may have assumed it was safe and fled the city. But he didn't get far. At around 7:30 in the morning, he was engulfed by the fourth pyroclastic current. Nearly 2,000 years after his death, Richard's brought him back to where his body cast now lies in Pompeii's granary. This is the first time a victim of Vesuvius, locked beneath a cast, has been reconstructed. The proportions of the man's face are an exact match to the skull that is still beneath the plaster. The mystery of what froze these people in time has finally been solved. The charred and burnt skeletons in Herculaneum, the evidence from Mount St. Helens, the contorted pose of the body cast in Pompeii, and the results of the cloth test. All have shown that these remains were the result of an extraordinary set of circumstances. But there's nothing to say these conditions won't come together again. The story of Mount Vesuvius is far from over. The volcano is still active. It has erupted 50 times in the last 2,000 years. The last time was in 1944. Half a meter of ash fell on Pompeii's ancient streets and across the surrounding towns. But this was a relatively small eruption. Since then, Vesuvius has been eerily quiet. Scientists know it will erupt again. They just don't know when.
Unfortunately, there's no way to predict when the next eruption will be. Certainly when the magma starts to make its way to the surface, we'll see signs of unrest, and then we'll be able to say that yes, the eruption could happen in the next months, weeks to months. But until then, it's just going to be quiet.
And Vesuvius is more dangerous than ever. The number of people living in its shadow is over 35 times what it was in 79 AD. 10 miles from Pompeii is the teeming city of Naples, one of the most densely populated places in the world, home to 3 million people. They would be engulfed in volcanic ash and debris. And Vesuvius is still capable of producing something even more lethal. A pyroclastic current, like that which exploded out of Mount St. Helens and which engulfed the people of ancient Pompeii. And this time, in the modern towns of Pompeii and the surrounding area, 500,000 people could be in its path.